Continuing with this discussion, looking at public investment management when applied to climate investment. So we are not talking about how much to invest, but we are talking about the fiscal policies for assessing public investment management related to climate. Okay? The Climate Public Investment Management Assessment aims to, I don't like putting together so many words like that, so I would have called it Assessment of Climate Public Investment Management or something like this. But anyway, the Climate Public Investment Management Assessment aims to help governments identify potential improvements in institutions and processes to build low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure. The Climate Public Investment Management Assessment is designed around 5 elements of public investment management that are key for climate smart infrastructure. So we're talking about climate resilience, financial resilience, and the fiscal policies to accomplish all these things. It assesses a country's capacity to manage climate-related infrastructure and assess the following key dimensions of a public investment management framework. So what are these? Climate-aware planning. Is public investment planned from a climate change perspective? So that has to be kept in mind. You need region-specific local information for this, and IPCC is not necessarily providing anything at regional scales at required skills. So hopefully future assessments and future projections from the IPCC will take care of that. Coordination between entities. Is there effective coordination of decision making? Excuse me. Where was I? Is there, so this is about coordination between entities. Is there effective coordination of decision making on climate change related public investment across the public sector? Project appraisal and selection. Do project appraisal and selection include climate related analysis and criteria? So every time big projects are put forward, obviously there is often lobbying and push from private players trying to influence governments to invest public money into these projects, but do they always include climate related analysis and criteria? Budgeting and portfolio management. Is climate related investment spending subject to active management and oversight? So even if you yielded to pressure from a private investor and invested a lot of public money into a project, and you decided that the assessment or appraisal done by the private providers themselves are up to snuff in terms of management or climate related analysis and criteria, you still need active management and oversight to make sure that new information doesn't come in and contradict what was sold to the government. Risk management. Are fiscal risks relating to climate change and infrastructure incorporated in budgets and fiscal risk analysis and managed according to a plan? Okay. Moving forward, project design could be adapted to deal with deep uncertainties of climate change. So this we've talked about a little bit, so I won't go into too many details, but project development can explore the opportunity to delay full implementation of adaptation measures until better information becomes available and or planned for facilitated future adaptation add-ons and the so-called real options. For example, land could be purchased near an airport to allow for the future runway extensions that could become necessary when higher temperatures hamper takeoff. So you need a longer runway. This has already been argued that taking off is becoming harder because of warming temperatures and changes in air density, for example. Warmer air is more humid air in general is lighter, depends on how you count, but assuming same volume, you replace air molecule with a water molecule, it gets lighter. Some tools such as asset criticality analysis in a network system, stress testing and robust decision making, and metrics to capture distributional impacts can help prioritize adaptation and resilience projects that account for societal benefits and uncertainty. The World Bank has developed a resilience rating system that provides guidance on how to include climate risks into project design and development. Reading a few more, it's critical to address any major PIM weaknesses before embarking on a significant adaptation investment scale-up. This is rather intuitive and obvious, so its weaknesses have to be analyzed. PIM assessment framework can help countries comprehensively assess their PIM practices and design a sequenced reform action plan to improve infrastructure governance, for example. The role of finance ministries is critical in ensuring that climate change is reflected in macroeconomic frameworks and adaptation policies are well integrated in budget process. Okay, capacity development support from the international community could accelerate needed capacity building in PFM. So this can come in various forms. For example, the green PFM that we discussed, green PFM practices remain nascent in most countries. IMF is stepping up its capacity development efforts, especially in low capacity countries, to mainstream climate considerations into PFM processes. Those efforts aim at helping countries to better incorporate adaptation strategies and to better select, design and implement adaptation programs, thereby helping them make the most of scarce resources. It could also help them meet the requirements for accessing climate funds or climate instruments from multilaterals. Okay. How long am I in this one? I think still not long enough. I'm doing this bad habit of seeing how long the podcast is and jumping back and out and into the PPTs. Hopefully that's not distracting, but maybe it's a break to assimilate what I just said. So Annex 1 here provides some useful information on global progress on national adaptation plans, which is a critical part of the Paris Agreement. Many countries have found it useful to articulate their adaptation strategies in dedicated documents known as national adaptation plans. In 2010, an NAP process was established under the Cancun Adaptation Framework with two objectives in mind: to reduce vulnerability to climate change by increasing adaptive capacity and resilience, and to facilitate the integration of adaptation into new and existing policies, programs and activities within all relevant sectors. In 2015, the integration of climate change into national policy, including climate change adaptation, became an action target under the Climate Action Sustainable Development Goals, so that adaptation and mitigation don't go off independently of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in terms of equity, justice, energy, water, health, education, etc. Some countries include their NAP as part of their national climate change action plans. So there is the NAP, which is action plan and adaptation plan, right? Whereas others choose to develop a separate, more comprehensive and specific adaptation framework. Timescales can be different. Adaptation tends to be longer term. Action plan for climate could include dealing with extremes that are already happening, for example, and longer term plans as well. We reconstructed a global database, the Adaptation Plan Tracker, to assess country progress based on building blocks suggested by the UNFCCC. Okay, this data was compiled using various sources. The database counts the number of steps taken toward building the adaptation plans and addressing the UNFCCC's 4 planning and implementation steps, which I will not read off here, but you can follow up. We have discussed this elsewhere as well. As of 2021, most countries in the world have initiated the National Adaptation Plan process. Okay, all but a handful of Middle East countries have taken at least one step toward the formulation and implementing of their NAPs. We saw a map early on. According to the guidelines, the NAP process should start with the definition of a clear mandate, institutional arrangements, and stakeholder consultations. However, countries that have only taken one step have typically focused on analyzing how climate change may affect communities and the economy. If you remember, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries, I think, without an NAP. Saudi Arabia is rich. It's doing many things like renewable energies, desalination, research into green hydrogen, etc. But most of them are geared towards future plans of economies and development if oil has to be left in the ground and so on, not so much climate adaptation. So hopefully they will change. Many countries have made substantial progress, with 104 out of 166 having taken 3 or more steps. At least 52 countries in the world have published a full-fledged NAP, which we'll look at a table in the next podcast. Future work will focus on expanding the dataset coverage and maintaining up-to-date information. So I want to leave this here and focus a little bit on this table in terms of UNFCCC and the European Commission recommended adaptation plan measures, and then look at the table of countries with NAPs so that we can advertise that podcast separately. Okay. When I record these, I'm somewhat mindful of putting these out in social media so that they are packaged appropriately, so that people who don't want to go through the whole series of podcasts can pick and choose a few that they might find interesting or of relevance. Okay. So since I'm serving this for public consumption anyway, education is not the only goal. You also want to create awareness, etc. So still in the educational framework, but serve it as appropriate. Okay.